Thank you. So we are going to talk about employee engagement, or the relative lack of it. Polls consistently show that about 2/3 of us are disengaged at work. About 20% of us are actively disengaged, which means we hate what we do. And that 20% costs over $500 billion a year in lost productivity. Now, interestingly, polls also show that most of us are satisfied with our jobs. And how can that be? How can we be satisfied but not engaged? Well, there's a difference between the two. Satisfied employees look like this. They're okay. They don't love what they do, but they don't hate it enough to quit. But engaged employees do love what they do. And they're actively working toward their own improvement and the improvement of their company. So if we want people who don't hate us enough to quit, we don't have to change. We're doing awesome. But if we want people who are excited to come in every day, who are going to make our businesses better, then we need to rethink the way that we conceive of and then practice the leadership that leads to employee engagement. And I know that sounds like I'm advocating for huge shifts in the way we do things, but I'm not. I'm going to talk about two very small, very simple, very essential alterations in the way that we currently operate as leaders. The way that we think about what leadership actually is, and then the way that we teach it to ourselves and others. So let's talk first about what leadership is, because for the most part, it is presented to us like this, as part of a two-sided coin. There's a bunch of stuff that means you're a good leader, and there's a bunch of other stuff you can do that makes you a bad leader. But leadership is actually more nuanced than that. There are two things that happen side by side in effective leadership, which, because I'm extremely creative, I'm going to call good leadership and great leadership. Good leadership involves issues of interpersonal interaction, and that is what most of us and most leadership education really focuses on. This is things like having an open door policy, giving credit for good work, providing intelligent motivators and incentives, etc., like that. Great leadership, though, focuses on our ability to communicate our vision for where we want to go and our adamantine belief in the mission of our enterprise. Good leadership focuses on human connection, great leadership on mission, vision, and value. And both of these are essential, and I cannot stress that enough. This is not a conversation about the need for us to talk about being great at the expense of being good, or the other way around, and I'll show you why right now. An ADP analysis of recent survey results compiled by the Society of Human Resources Management found that the top 6 motivators for engaged employees are, in this order, as follows. Take a moment, just look those over. 2 of these deal strictly with issues of interpersonal interaction. They are the function of good leadership. 2 of these deal strictly with issues of meaning, purpose, and value. They are the function of great leadership. And 2 of these are a combination of both. What this means is that engaged employees are becoming engaged employees because their leaders are practicing both good and great leadership qualities at the same time. If we focus only on being a good leader, on making people feel valued and respected, then they feel valued and respected, but they don't think that what they do is especially important. And if we focus only on being a great leader, on talking about how world-changing the work we do is, then we get people who understand that, but who don't think that they themselves are necessary to its execution. The problem is that we haven't actually acknowledged that there are 2 things we need to be doing. So most of us spend a lot of time thinking about how to be good leaders without thinking about how to be great ones. And so we get what we have now. We get a lot of satisfied employees that are not especially engaged. And then most so-called great leaders do not spend enough time thinking about how to be good ones. George Washington, for example, was an undeniably great leader for somehow keeping the Revolutionary Army in the field that winter at Valley Forge when they had no food, supplies, or hope of an easy victory. But he was also a terrible listener, so bad that he refused to march on Yorktown for weeks at the end of the battle because he was convinced the final battle would happen at New York. He had to be tricked into that final march by his French allies. Steve Jobs have made 98 movies about him, a great leader at Apple with an undeniably amazing vision, but by all accounts, an extremely difficult person to work for. And you might argue, who cares? They achieved greatness, so what if they weren't all that good? But let's analyze what that greatness really is. George Washington was never able to get the Continental Congress to give him the supplies he needed to run an effective war. He spent half of his generalship trying to prevent it from being given away to other commanders, and he unnecessarily prolonged the final stages of the conflict because he wouldn't listen to his subordinates. Jobs was kicked out of the company he founded. He got it back later, but it might not have happened in the first place if he had just been a better, good leader. Washington might have had an easier war of independence to fight if he had simply been a better listener. So that's the first thing we need to understand. There are two pieces of effective leadership. They are not mutually exclusive. They are not interchangeable. And we need to be doing both of them if we want to have an engaged workforce. The next thing we need to do is focus on how we teach that to ourselves and others. Because right now, the overwhelming majority of leadership education is presented in exactly one way. We tell ourselves what we should be doing, how we should behave as leaders. And that's okay to a point, but eventually, if that is all that you are doing, the people that you share that with stop feeling like you're being informative. They start feeling like you're being pedantic. We start to feel like we're being lectured to, and that's when we as listeners and learners tune out completely. Employees who leave jobs, 50% of them do so to get away from a boss they don't like. Those bosses have access to leadership education. There is no shortage of books, seminars, conferences, webinars, no shortage of education. But that education is obviously not sinking in. So we need to rethink the way that we are teaching ourselves to become better, good, and great leaders. So what if we spend a little more time talking about how to do everything wrong, how to screw it up? Let's say, for example, that you wanted to help somebody improve the way that they deliver effective constructive criticism. It is a difficult skill to master, and most research suggests that you are going to need to say 4 or 5 times as many nice things as mean ones in order to do it right. In other words, for every critical, demeaning, constructive, or otherwise imperfect thing you say to somebody, you will eventually need to say 4 or 5 nice things to counterbalance it. And you can share that information. You can repeat it a million times. You can put it on posters in the office. You can role play these exercises, and we do all that stuff. But eventually, if that is all that you do, the people that you're sharing it with are going to stop listening. They feel like they're being lectured to. None of us want to be lectured to. So I'm going to help you learn how to deliver effective constructive criticism, but I'm going to help you do it in a slightly different way. Because according to the research that we've talked about, here is how maybe you should do it. Excellent work on the Parker project. You've met your deadline. You came in at budget. Your presentation skills have really improved since last time. Next time, I need you to focus on communication. I didn't always know what was happening. That was an issue for me. Work on that for next time. Overall, though, you've done a very good job. You can see the 5-to-1 ratio here. You heard the criticism, but it doesn't seem too heavy. Almost sounds like an honest attempt to help somebody improve some particular element of their business. But that is not what I want you to do. What I want to teach you how to do is the compliment sandwich. This is a 2-to-1 ratio of positive to negative that might make you think you're being nicer than you are mean, but which really only convinces people that those bookended compliments are a cover for the purpose of the conversation, which is the chicken tender of criticism right there in the middle. And this can actually be a lot of fun, and I want you to see how much fun this can be. I'd like you to turn to the person you're sitting next to. This will be very painless, I promise. Come on, turn to them, do it. Turn to them, look them right in the eyes, and repeat after me. You look great today. I hate you and wish we'd never met. I like your shoes. Okay. Which one of those was the most fun? Which one are you going to remember? The criticism, and maybe the shoes too, but the criticism. That is exactly how people are going to interpret the compliment sandwich. So let's look at what we've just done here. We've just built some negative education into our positive education. You've just been given an example of how to deliver effective constructive criticism, but you've also been told how to do it wrong. And our brains weight negative information more powerfully than positive information. That is the reason all of us need to hear 4 or 5 times as many nice things as mean ones in order to feel happy and balanced. So because of this negative example, you're actually more likely to remember this, and for longer than if I had only stood up here and told you how to do everything right. Plus, it's more fun, and that never hurt anything. I'm not suggesting we teach bad practices as good practices when they are not good practices. What I am saying is that right now we only seem to appreciate the education that comes from telling people what they should be doing. And we do not currently appreciate the educational power that comes from talking about how to do things wrong. How amazing would that be, to be able to create a more engaged workforce with a simple shift in our understanding of what leadership really involves and requires, and a little more creativity in the way that we teach it, to help ourselves become better leaders, sometimes by talking about how to screw the whole thing up. Is it unorthodox? Yes. But given that 2/3 of us are currently disengaged at work, doing things the way we've always done them, probably not the best way to go. Thank you very much.